The floors at Hargrove Medical Center were white. Not hospital white, the kind of white that costs money. Italian marble, imported in panels, and laid by a crew that flew in from Florence for 3 weeks, and left behind an invoice that would have funded a small clinic in rural Georgia for a year. The kind of white that made visitors slow their stride, look down, feel the faint guilt of wealth reflected back at them. Daniel Hayes walked those floors at 11:15 every night, pushing a cart that squeaked on the second wheel. He'd reported it twice. Nobody fixed it. He was 38. 6 feet. Brown hair that needed a cut and hadn't gotten one since October. His uniform was the pale gray of institutional fabric, the color of things nobody looks at. He wore it the same way every shift. Tucked in, collar flat, sleeves rolled exactly once at the wrist. Not sloppy, not sharp, invisible. He moved through the VIP corridor, the East Wing, 3rd floor, with the kind of economy that people who've worked in confined spaces learn without knowing they've learned it. No wasted motion, no shuffling, just the cart, the mop, the quiet squeak of the second wheel, and the sound of his own breathing steady in the dark. The VIP wing was different from the rest of Hargrove. Here, the patient rooms had actual windows, not the frosted panes of the general wards, but floor-to-ceiling glass that looked out over the city. The nurses' station had a marble countertop. The waiting area had an espresso machine and art that wasn't prints. Daniel didn't look at any of it. He stopped at the supply closet at the end of the hall, unlocked it with the keycard that hung from his lanyard, and began restocking his cart. Bleach. Extra microfiber. The pH-neutral solution for the marble. They'd made a point of telling him, during orientation, about the marble. Don't use anything acidic. The stone is imported. He remembered nodding. He remembered thinking about his daughter. Lily was 6. She had her mother's mouth and her father's eyes, dark, watchful. Too serious for her age. She'd been coughing since September. Not dangerously, but persistently. The pediatrician had used the phrase environmental triggers twice, which meant nothing definitive and everything uncertain. Daniel had been tracking her symptoms in a small notebook he kept in his breast pocket. Duration, severity, time of day, triggers he could identify, triggers he couldn't. The notebook was soft at the corners from being opened and closed. It looked like something a man carried when he couldn't afford to forget anything. Tonight, Lily was with Mrs. Belton downstairs, a retired schoolteacher on the 2nd floor of their building, who watched the girl on night shifts in exchange for Daniel helping with her taxes every April, and fixing whatever needed fixing whenever it needed fixing. It was the kind of arrangement that held together not by contract, but by a specific quality of trust. The kind between people who'd decided, without discussion, to take care of each other. Daniel finished restocking. He pushed the cart back into the hallway. At the far end of the corridor, by the nurse's station, a cluster of staff stood around a monitor. One of them, Dr. Preston Caulfield, 2nd-year resident, still wearing the expression of a man who thought medicine was about being right, looked up as Daniel passed. "Can you get the bathroom near 312? Caulfield said. "Not a question. It's on my list," Daniel said. Caulfield was already looking back at the monitor. Daniel pushed the cart to 312. He put on gloves. He worked methodically surfaces first, then the floor, the drain, the fixtures. He checked the soap dispenser. He replaced the paper towels. He noticed the caulk around the base of the sink was starting to separate and made a note in his head to report it, knowing it probably wouldn't get done for 3 weeks. On the way out, he passed a window. He paused, just a breath, and looked out at the city. 42 floors of lights beneath a sky that never went fully dark above a city this size. Somewhere in that geometry of light, Lily was asleep. He hoped she was asleep. He pushed the cart forward. The second wheel squeaked. Dr. Caulfield was telling a story at the nurse's station. Daniel could hear it as he approached a story about a patient, told with the casual authority of someone who believed the hallway belonged to him, didn't even know the correct dosage, and he's been self-medicating for 6 months, so we're basically starting from zero. The nurse he was speaking to, a woman named Carla, who had been at Hargrove for 11 years, and whose face had learned the expression of polite attention without actual engagement, glanced over Caulfield's shoulder and caught Daniel's eye for a brief moment. Daniel gave a small nod. He kept moving. "Hey," Caulfield called after him. Daniel stopped, turned. "There's something near the elevator." Room service dropped a tray. He said it without looking up. "I'll get to it," Daniel said. "It's been there 20 minutes. I'll get to it." Caulfield finally looked up. He had the kind of face that had been handsome long enough to develop the expectation of deference. He was 28. He'd never been to a place where his face didn't matter. "This is a VIP ward," he said. "Standards are different here." Daniel looked at him. Not long. Not in a way that communicated anything specific. Just looked. The way a man looks at something that isn't surprising. "I know what ward this is," he said. He pushed the cart toward the elevator. At 1:40 in the morning, Daniel found his daughter. He hadn't expected it. Lily wasn't supposed to be here. Mrs. Belton's shift of watching her ran until 3. But there she was, curled in the plastic chair at the end of the East Wing hallway. Her small winter coat pulled around her like a blanket. Her head against the wall. Asleep. Beside her, a folded note from Mrs. Belton slipped under the emergency contact form Daniel kept in his locker. "She woke up asking for you. Couldn't settle her. Sorry, Danny." He stood over her for a moment. Her breathing was even. No cough. Her cheeks were pink from the heated building and sleep. Her shoes were on the wrong feet. She always did that when she put them on herself. He crouched down, fixed the shoes without waking her. Then he sat in the chair beside her. Just for a moment, just long enough. He looked down the empty corridor. The lights here were dimmed for the overnight hours, leaving a soft, amber-adjacent glow that made the marble look almost warm. "Bo tung la bak sir dung hung," she'd asked him once, in the way children ask things not as accusation, not as question, exactly, but as fact awaiting confirmation. She'd seen him looking at a wound on a neighbor's forearm, with the particular attention of someone reading text in a familiar language. He had told her he used to help people who were hurt. She had accepted this, with the seriousness she applied to most information. "Do you miss it?" He had thought about that for a long time. "I miss you more," he'd finally said. "When I'm not there." She had thought about that too, with her small forehead furrowed, and then nodded slowly, like she'd decided something. Like she'd decided him. Victoria Hale arrived at Hargrove Medical Center at 8:15 on a Thursday morning with the energy of a weather system. She was 41. The kind of 41 that photographed like 35 and moved like 28. Her hair was dark and worn back not as an aesthetic choice but as an efficiency one. The way she wore everything. For function. For time. She had founded Hale Capital at 29 with $60,000 and a methodology that her competitors had called reckless until they'd spent 3 years watching her be right. Her net worth, as of last quarter, was estimated at $4.3 billion. She treated this number the way other people treated a weather forecast useful information. Nothing to get emotional about. She'd been pushing through a schedule for 11 months without a break, when her physician, Dr. Eugene Morford, had said the words stress, cardiomyopathy, and precautionary evaluation in the same sentence. And she had said fine in the tone of someone who meant unnecessary, and then arrived at Hargrove anyway, because Victoria Hale had never been sloppy about risk management. Her assistant, a young man named Bradley, who had learned to anticipate her silences, had arranged the suite on the 3rd-floor VIP wing, in and out. One day, observation, blood work, stress test, echo, done by evening. She walked the hallway with her phone in hand, half of her attention on a message thread about a deal that was closing in Singapore, and the other half doing the instinctive calculation she always did in new environments. Exits, sight lines, who was in charge of what. She noticed the janitor at the far end of the hallway, near the supply closet. She noticed him because of his hands. He was filling something in a cart, chemical bottles, she assumed. From the shape of them, and his hands moved with the kind of deliberate precision that you didn't associate with the task. It was the economy of someone who'd learned to work in environments where a wrong movement had consequences. She'd seen it in surgeons, in pilots, in the kind of operators who didn't describe themselves as operators. She didn't think about it consciously. It registered and passed. The way useful information does, before you understand, it's useful. She looked back at her phone. The morning passed without incident. Blood work. Echo. The technician who ran the stress test had a calming manner and didn't try to make conversation, which Victoria appreciated. Dr. Morford checked in twice. Bradley sat in the waiting area with his laptop and managed 8 things simultaneously, occasionally appearing in the doorway to deliver information and immediately disappearing again. By 2 in the afternoon, she was in the VIP suite reviewing a contract. Her lunch delivered from a restaurant she'd instructed Bradley to research in advance on the table beside her. Mostly untouched. She felt fine. She always felt fine. That wasn't the issue. The issue, according to Morford, was what her body was doing beneath the sensation of fine, a low, structural stress that didn't announce itself through symptoms so much as through data. Her heart rate variability was off. Her cortisol patterns were wrong. Her body was running an extended emergency mode and had simply forgotten to inform her. She signed the contract. She ate the lunch. She took a call from her CFO that lasted 18 minutes, during which she made 3 decisions that would affect approximately 400 employees across 2 divisions, and ended the call with the same tone she'd begun it. At 4:15, she stood. She needed water. The suite had a pitcher, but she preferred to walk one of the few concessions she'd made to what Morford called stress regulation, which mostly meant move your body, even briefly, even when you believe there's no time. She'd added 3 minutes of walking to her schedule, the way you'd add a calendar block. Non-negotiable, brief, functional. She walked into the hallway. The corridor was quiet at this hour, the particular quiet of an afternoon shift changing over, staff in transit, phones on hold. The amber lighting of the overhead panels gave the marble a warmth it didn't have in the morning. Down the hall, she could see the nurse's station, where one nurse sat writing. She was 12 feet from her suite door when she felt it. Not pain. That was the thing, not pain. Not the sharp warning she'd been half expecting and half dismissing for months. Just an absence, a brief electrical silence in her chest, like a power line going out. She had time to think. Oh, then the floor rose up. She went down hard. Her shoulder caught the edge of a room service cart that had been left in the hallway. The same cart Caulfield had mentioned to Daniel the previous night. Still there, and the impact spun her so that she hit the marble on her back, which is the only reason the people who ran toward her could see her face. Her eyes were open. That was the first thing the nurse at the station registered. Eyes open, but nobody home. The monitor at the nurse's station, the one tracking the suite's patient, a cardiac implant patient named Stewart, began alarming at the same moment. The nurse, whose name was Angie, looked at the monitor, then at Victoria on the floor, and made the split-second calculation that every nurse eventually makes. Which emergency is real right now? She came out from behind the station. She hit the call button as she moved. Cardiac event, East Wing, 3rd floor, outside Suite 8. She said into the intercom, her voice utterly flat and professional. She had done this before. Caulfield appeared from around the corner 30 seconds later, having heard the alarm from the resident lounge. 2 nurses from the late shift behind him. Then, an attending doctor, Marcus Finley, 50s, cardiac. The kind of doctor who wore his experience in his posture rather than his face. Finley was good. Finley was exactly the doctor you wanted. He was also, in this specific moment, standing at the edge of a legal and procedural reality that paralyzed even very good doctors. Victoria Hale had not yet been formally admitted to the hospital as a cardiac patient. She was a pre-op evaluation. Her paperwork was being processed. The consent forms that would authorize intervention were in Bradley's email, unsigned. The defibrillator cart was being retrieved. It was taking longer than it should because the corridor was configured for aesthetics, not emergency access. And the cart was stored 40 feet away in a supply room. 38 seconds had passed. Finley was running the calculus. Legal. Medical. Intervention risks in an unsecured patient with an unknown current cardiac status. He had 2 of the 4 facts he needed, and was missing the other two. He was not paralyzed, but he was not moving. Caulfield was looking at the monitor being wheeled in. His hands were at his sides. The nurse who'd radioed was doing compressions she'd started immediately, which was right. Which was the correct thing, but her technique was shallow. Not wrong. Just shallow. Under the pressure of the moment, most people's compressions are shallow. Daniel Hayes was at the other end of the hallway. He had heard the alarm. He heard it the way he heard certain sounds, not as background, but as signal. He had been in the middle of restocking a cart outside the service elevator. He'd turned when the alarm went off, looked down the hall, and processed the scene in the way he processed things. Entirely, quickly, without the emotional scaffolding that usually arrived first. He'd seen the woman on the floor. He'd seen the nurse's compressions. He'd seen Finley's posture. He'd seen the defibrillator still 10 feet from the body. He walked toward them. He didn't run. Running in narrow corridors is slower than walking fast. He knew the exact pace. He was at the scene in 9 seconds. Move. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. There was something in the timbre of it, something calibrated, that made the body respond before the mind could argue. The nurse looked up, shifted back automatically. Daniel came down beside Victoria Hale in a single, controlled drop, not a fall, a placement, and his hand went to her neck first. 2 fingers, carotid. He counted silently, his eyes on her face. Then, at her chest, reading the rise and absence of it. "She's in arrest," he said. "Who has the defib?" "It's coming," one of the nurses said. He looked at the monitor. He read it the way you read something you've read many times. "No shockable rhythm yet," he said. "Keep compressions going." He positioned his hands. Heel of the hand, center of sternum 2 finger widths above the xiphoid process, which is something you say on the first day of medical school, and which most people can find quickly, and most people under stress place slightly wrong. He placed his hands correctly and began. The rhythm was precise. 100 beats per minute. The correct depth, full 2 inches of sternal compression. Held for the minimum necessary, full recoil. He did this without thinking about it, which is the only way to do it properly. Finley said, "Who?" "Airway," Daniel said, without looking up. "Someone needs to be managing her airway." Angie was already there. Caulfield said, "You can't. Get the epinephrine ready," Daniel said, still not looking at him. 1 milligram 4. Push when the line's in. He glanced at Finley. "She have any known cardiac history?" Finley was looking at him with an expression that was recalibrating rapidly. "Stress. Evaluation. No confirmed event prior to. Age, weight, 41. 62 kilos, estimated. AED." Daniel said to the nearest nurse. The defibrillator had arrived. The nurse opened it. "Pads on," Daniel said. He didn't stop compressions while she placed them. He shifted his body geometry precisely so she could work around him without interrupting the rhythm. He had done this in vehicles, in half-destroyed buildings. In the dark, this was a clean marble corridor with full lighting. This was easy. 51 seconds into resuscitation, the monitor produced a different signal. "VFib," Angie said. "Stand clear," Daniel said. He leaned back, both hands off the body, and looked directly at Finley. "Your call, doctor." Finley met his eyes for exactly 1 second. Then, "Charge to 200. "Charging," the nurse said. "The sound the AED makes when it's building charge is a rising tone, like a held note on an instrument you don't want to learn." Everyone in the hallway heard it. "Clear," Finley said. The shock delivered. The monitor flatlined again for a moment that lasted longer than it should have. Then, a signal. Irregular at first, wandering. Then, slowly, finding its shape. Sinusrhythm. Slow, real. There, the monitor began beeping in the steady, measured tone that sounds, in that moment, like the best thing you've ever heard. Nobody spoke for a moment. Not because they were processing what they'd seen. They were all medical professionals. They understood. Clinically. exactly what had just happened. They didn't speak because there was someone in the hallway who shouldn't have known how to do what they'd just watched him do, and the gap between what they'd known about him 30 seconds ago and what they knew now was a kind of vertigo. Victoria Hale was breathing. She was unconscious. She would be for several more hours. But she was breathing with the shallow, steady rhythm of someone the body had decided to keep. Finley was the one who finally spoke. He said it quietly. "Who are you?" Daniel had already stood. He was at his cart. He'd stepped back to it as if by instinct, or perhaps by deliberate choice. His hands were steady. His expression was the expression of a man who had finished a task and was ready to move to the next one. "Daniel Hayes," he said. "Facilities." Finley looked at him for a long moment. "That's not what I asked." Daniel's eyes went to the monitor. To Victoria. To the team now surrounding her. Beginning the work of stabilization and transport. He looked at all of it the way he'd looked at everything tonight, without sentiment. "I know what you need to do," he said. "She needs a cath lab and a cardiology team inside 20 minutes. Her rhythm is stable, but she was down long enough that you're going to want imaging to rule out." "I know the protocol," Finley said. He said it without anger, just as information. Then, more quietly, "How do you?" Daniel put his hands in his pockets. "I used to," he said simply. He turned. He pushed the cart toward the service elevator. The second wheel squeaked. Later, much later, after Victoria had been transferred to the cardiac ICU, after the paperwork had caught up to the event, after Finley had written his incident report with a precision that managed to be both accurate and incomplete, the security footage was reviewed. What it showed was simple. A man in a gray uniform walking to a fallen woman and keeping her alive for 51 seconds until the right equipment arrived, then making recommendations that 2 of the 3 attending physicians on site confirmed were exactly correct, then walking away. The hospital's administrative director, a man named Gerald Osworth, reviewed the footage at 7 the next morning with his legal counsel and 2 representatives from the board. They were not watching it in the spirit of admiration. "He's a facilities employee," one of them said. "He has no active medical license. His actions, while..." "She's alive," Osworth said. Silence. "She's alive," he said again, "and we need to understand who we're dealing with." The file that came back was not short. Daniel Aaron Hayes. Born in Charlottesville, Virginia, 38 years ago. Undergraduate at the University of Virginia. Medical school at Johns Hopkins. Residency. General surgery. Boston. Then a different path. A commission, an assignment, a specialty that put him in places where the buildings didn't have roofs, and the patients arrived with injuries that civilian medicine didn't have a language for yet. Combat surgeon. 2 deployments. 1 commendation for an operation that was still partially classified, which meant the summary in his file used the phrase "performed under extreme conditions with extraordinary outcomes," and stopped there. He'd been good. Everyone who'd worked with him described him the same way. Calm. Always calm. And precise. And the person you wanted in the room when nothing was supposed to work. Then, Rebecca Hayes, his wife. A teacher. A car that crossed the median on a wet night on Route 7. A hospital that did everything correctly and couldn't do enough. He'd left medicine within the year. Not suspended. Not disciplined. He'd simply filed the paperwork and not renewed his license. His letter of resignation from the hospital where he'd begun a fellowship had been 3 sentences long. The 3rd sentence was, "I need to be somewhere my daughter can find me." Lily found him in the hallway the morning after. She'd woken earlier than Mrs. Belton expected, and made her way upstairs with the particular purposefulness of a 6-year-old who has decided something. She was wearing her coat over her pajamas, which was technically Mrs. Belton's failure and practically irrelevant, because the building's hallways were heated, and Lily had her own logic about things. She found her father sitting outside the service elevator on the back stairs, eating a granola bar, which was what he ate when he forgot to pack a real breakfast, which was most mornings now. She sat beside him. "People were talking," she said. "About what?" "You." She looked at him with the frank assessment of someone who did not yet know how to pretend not to see things. "They said, you fixed someone." He thought about that word. Fixed. I kept someone's heart going until the right people could help her, he said. Lily considered this. She had a granola bar, too. She'd taken one from the box in his bag without asking, which was something they'd discussed and which she continued to do. He didn't mention it. Is she going to be okay? I think so, he said. She's in good hands. Better hands than yours? He looked at her. She was looking at him with the absolute seriousness that she reserved for important things. Her assessment of movies, her opinions about what should be eaten for dinner, and her questions about her father's interior life. Different hands, he said finally. Different and good. She thought about this for a while. Mrs. Belton says you used to be the best one, she said. He was quiet. She says she looked you up. She said this without apology, the way children deliver information that adults carefully don't look for. She said you were famous for it. For being calm. The building hummed around them. The elevator cable somewhere above them moved in its shaft. Someone on a floor below was starting their day, the muffled sound of a cabinet, a kettle. Being calm isn't the same as being the best, he said. But it helps, she said. Yeah, he said. It helps. She leaned against him. She smelled like her shampoo and the specific warmth of a child who has slept well. He put his arm around her. Are you in trouble? She asked. He thought about that honestly. I don't know yet, he said. Okay, she said. Just okay. Not, don't worry. Not, it'll be fine. Just the acceptance that not knowing was a real answer, and she could sit inside it with him. He pulled her a little closer. The elevator hummed. Victoria came back to full consciousness the following afternoon, 29 hours after she'd gone down. She returned to awareness the way she returned to everything. Not gradually, but abruptly. As if some internal switch had been thrown, and she'd decided to be present again. One moment, the ICU was a murmur of sounds and indistinct shapes. The next, she was reading the monitor above her bed and assessing the IV line in her arm. Morford was there within minutes. He was kind and careful and thorough. He told her what had happened, and she listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her. When he finished, she said, "The rhythm, was it V-fib?" He blinked. Yes. The defib was delivered at approximately 50 seconds. Then, closer to 60, he said. There was a delay in getting the equipment to you, but someone started compressions immediately? A nurse, Morford said. And then yes, there was someone else. Who? He paused. That's being looked into, he said carefully. She read his hesitation the way she read financial statements, looking for what wasn't being said. Tell me, she said. Bradley had found out before anyone else. He was, as a species of assistant, unusually competent, the kind of person who understood that his job wasn't to answer questions, but to anticipate them, and who had therefore spent the previous 20 hours quietly assembling information, while Victoria's medical team assembled her back into operational condition. When she asked him, he told her cleanly who Daniel was, what he'd done, what the record showed, why he was currently pushing a maintenance cart through a hospital where he'd once been trained to save the exact kind of life he'd just saved. She listened to all of it. She didn't react, not because she had no reaction, but because she had the discipline of someone who'd learned early that unexamined reactions are expensive. When Bradley finished, she was quiet for a moment. His daughter, she said. What's her name? Lily, Bradley said. 6 years old. She's been accompanying him on some shifts, staying in common areas. Victoria turned toward the window. The city was gray today. October clouds. Flat light. She's at the hospital right now. Yes. He brought her this morning. Okay, Victoria said. Bradley waited for the next instruction. It didn't come immediately, which was unusual. Find out if she's eaten, Victoria said finally. Bradley looked at her. Lunch, Victoria said. She's 6, and she's been waiting in a hallway for hours. Find out if anyone's fed her. He didn't want to see her. That wasn't quite right. He didn't have a strong feeling about it either way, which was its own kind of answer. When the hospital administrator, Osworth, had come to find him that morning with the expression of a man prepared for a difficult conversation, Daniel had listened to everything with the patience he extended to most difficult conversations. Fully, without resistance, waiting to see where it landed. Where it landed was no disciplinary action under the circumstances, given the outcome. A recommendation that he look into relicensing, an awareness on the part of the administration that they were now in a complicated and unprecedented situation, and that the easiest resolution involved everyone behaving well. He'd said all right and gone back to the East Wing. The message from Bradley arrived at 2:15. It was brief and professional. Miss Hale would like to speak with you when you have a moment. No obligation. Room 412. Cardiac ICU. He'd stared at it for longer than necessary. Lily, beside him on her plastic chair, she'd refused to go back to Mrs. Belton's that day, claiming jurisdiction over her own schedule, with the force of someone who decided this was a moment to be present for, had read it over his arm. The lady whose heart stopped, she said. Yes. Are you going to go? He folded his phone. Probably. I want to come. That's not. Please. She said it with the specificity of please that had a very particular emotional structure. Not demanding, not pleading, but asking in the way you ask when you already know the answer should be yes, and you're just waiting for the person to figure it out. He looked at her for a moment. Stay beside me, he said. She nodded once, satisfied. The room Victoria Hale occupied in the cardiac ICU was the quietest room in the building. The machines here were newer, their alarms quieter, their displays larger. The window looked north. The light came in at an angle that made everything look considered. Like a photograph taken by someone who understood light. She was sitting up when they came in. Not quite straight, she was still attached to monitors, still wearing the aftermath of 29 hours of unconsciousness, but upright, which was clearly a decision she'd made about herself. She looked at Daniel first. Then at Lily. Daniel said, You wanted to speak with me? Yes, she said. She had a voice that was direct, without being hard. The voice of someone who'd learned to separate efficiency from coldness and preferred to be efficient. Thank you for what you did. He nodded once. This was his standard acknowledgement for things he'd rather not discuss. Morford told me the detail, she said. 51 seconds. The rhythm you called. The dosage you specified. She paused. You weren't guessing. No, he agreed. You haven't practiced in 4 years. Some things don't leave, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. The quality of her attention was notable. It was the kind of attention that actually took things in, rather than simply directing itself at them. Then she looked at Lily. Lily was standing exactly beside Daniel, as promised. She was looking at Victoria with an expression that was an extraordinary mixture of seriousness and curiosity. Hi, Lily said. Hi, Victoria said. Your heart stopped, Lily said. Not accusatory, just the delivery of known information. It did, Victoria said. My dad fixed it. He helped fix it, Daniel said. Lily frowned at this distinction. She filed it without fully accepting it. It sounds like he fixed it, she said. A beat. And then, unexpectedly, the thing that Victoria hadn't planned for, she almost smiled. It was not a full smile. It was the edge of one, the kind of expression that happens before you can prevent it, that exists in the gap between intention and reaction. Daniel saw it. He didn't know what to make of it. He filed it. The conversation lasted 23 minutes, which was longer than Daniel had intended, and shorter than Victoria's instinct suggested was necessary. She asked him about his training. She asked carefully, not intrusively the way you ask about something that matters by not asking directly about the thing that matters. She asked about the deployments in a way that made clear she'd already read the file, so they could speak about it as shared information rather than as disclosure. He answered concisely. He answered in the way of someone who'd decided a long time ago not to make his own history the primary subject of any conversation. She asked about Lily. He was less concise about this. Not more verbose, just slower. The way people are slower about the things they actually mean. The cough, he said, because that was what was most present. Environmental triggers. We've been trying to identify. He paused. She's fine. It's manageable. You've been tracking it, Victoria said. It wasn't a question, it was the recognition of something she'd inferred. He looked at her. "You had a notebook in your pocket," she said. "Last night." I noticed it. He'd forgotten she'd seen anything before she'd gone down. He'd forgotten there'd been a moment earlier in the day when she'd walked the hallway, and he'd been at the supply closet. "She has a pulmonologist she sees," he said. "She's being looked after." "I know a specialist," Victoria said. "Pediatric pulmonology. She's the best in the city." She paused. "Possibly the country." Daniel looked at her evenly. She looked back. There was something careful in how she said what came next. "I'm not offering it as payment. I'm offering it because I have access, and you need it, and it would be a waste of both if I didn't." He was quiet for a moment. "That's a distinction," he said. "It's an important one," she said. Another pause. Lily, who had been sitting quietly in the chair beside Daniel, had slowly listed sideways until her head was on his arm. She was not asleep, her eyes were still open, slightly, watching the window, but she was somewhere between wakefulness and the surrender to it that happens in warm rooms in the late afternoon. Victoria watched them. The monitor beside her beep, measured and steady. "I'm not asking you to make a decision today," she said. "I'm asking you to consider it." He looked at his daughter. Her eyes had fully closed now. "I'll consider it," he said. Osworth convened the meeting 3 days later, with 6 board members, 2 senior physicians, and the hospital's chief legal counsel. The agenda, officially, was incident review. Patient intervention by non-licensed staff. Unofficially, it was a room full of people who needed to figure out how to respond to the fact that their marble floors and their Nespresso machine and their imported Italian stone had not prevented a cardiac event that had been handled by a man who cleaned their bathrooms. The legal liability was real. The paperwork gaps were real. The protocol violations, from a certain angle, were real. Caulfield was in the room. He'd been invited because he'd been present, which was procedurally correct, and because he'd asked to speak, which was perhaps a mistake on Osworth's part. Caulfield said that while the outcome had been fortunate, the intervention had created significant risk. An unlicensed individual making medical decisions in a high-stakes environment, the potential for harm if the compressions had been done incorrectly, the liability exposure if she had died, said the woman in the doorway. They all turned. Victoria Hale had been discharged that morning. She was standing at the conference room entrance, which nobody had closed because nobody had expected anyone other than who was already in the room. She was in her own clothes, a gray cashmere top, dark trousers, no ornamentation. She looked like herself. Whatever had happened 3 days ago to the floor of the East Wing corridor had clearly been addressed. Osworth stood. "Miss Hale, you didn't need to." "I know I didn't need to," she said. She came into the room. Nobody offered her a seat, because everyone was very briefly unable to think of the correct social action. She stood at the end of the table. "I was told this meeting was about the incident," she said. "I am the incident." It seemed relevant to be present. Legal counsel opened his mouth, closed it. She looked at Caulfield for a moment. "You were there," she said. "Yes," he said. "You had 5 seconds of decision time before the equipment arrived," she said. "What did you decide?" "A pause. I was assessing." "That's not an answer," she said, not unkindly. "It's a description of inaction." "I'm not saying it critically." She looked at the room. "I'm saying it because I want to be clear about what I watched on that footage. A man who had every reason to keep his head down, whose job gave him every permission to keep his head down, chose not to. And you're sitting here discussing liability." Silence. "I'll be clear," she said. "Daniel Hayes will not face any professional consequence from this hospital for what he did. If he faces consequences from this hospital, I will make that consequential in a way that is significantly less comfortable than whatever's happening in this room right now." She let that settle. "That's not a threat. It's a practical statement about how I allocate resources when I feel something is wrong." She looked at Osworth. "The second thing," she said, "I'd like to fund a relicensing pathway for him, if he's willing. Not through the hospital independently. His decision, his timeline, no strings. Osworth said, "That's very generous." "It's practical," she said. "He's exactly the person who should be doing this work. We don't have many of them. It would be wasteful to leave that where it is." She looked around the room once more, the particular sweep of a woman who is noting who is in a place and filing it away. "Good meeting," she said. She left. He found out about the meeting from Angie, who had heard about it from one of the administrative nurses, who had been asked to arrange the conference room coffee service and had therefore been nearby when Victoria Hale walked in. Angie told him in the break room, with the directness of a woman who'd been in nursing for 11 years and had no patience for dramatic reveals or narrative scaffolding. She gave him the facts. She watched his face. He didn't say anything for a moment. "She defended you," Angie said, pretty directly. "I heard," he said. "She also put up money for your license." "I heard that too." Angie waited. "I'm thinking," he said. "I know you're thinking," Angie said. "You've been thinking since you walked out of her room 3 days ago. You have a very recognizable thinking face." He looked at her. "It's a good offer," she said. "And you know it's a good offer. You're the only one in this building who doesn't run toward a good offer." She stood. "Also, Lily's cough has been better this week. In case nobody told you." She picked up her coffee. "I mean, statistically." "I've been listening." He stared at the table. She went back to the floor. He thought about it for 4 more days. He thought about it in the way he thought about most things, not in one sustained period but in fragments, in the margins of tasks, in the 12 seconds between turning off the bathroom lights and moving to the next room. He thought about it while Lily slept. He thought about it while making her the oatmeal she preferred with the specific quantity of brown sugar that she monitored closely. He thought about what he'd felt in the hallway when he'd gone to his knees beside Victoria Hale. He tried to be honest about it. It had not felt like a memory. It had not felt like something he was retrieving. It had felt, for those 51 seconds, like exactly what it was. The thing he knew how to do, the thing he was built for. Not in the heroic sense, he had no illusions about heroics, but in the most practical sense. The way a carpenter looks at a joint that needs making, and knows, in the body, not the mind, exactly where to place the cut. He had been, for those 51 seconds, someone who was in the right place. He hadn't felt that in a long time. He called the specialist Victoria had mentioned on a Friday. The office scheduled Lily for the following Thursday. The appointment took 68 minutes. The specialist, Dr. Catherine Marsh, who was indeed extraordinary, and whose waiting room had a mural of birds that Lily stood in front of for a full 3 minutes before agreeing to come in, identified 2 specific environmental triggers that hadn't been on anyone's radar, and recommended a management protocol that Daniel had already mostly understood, but hadn't had the confirmed data to implement. The cough was better by the following week. He did not call Victoria to tell her this. He thought about calling her and then didn't, for reasons he didn't entirely examine. The voicemail came on a Tuesday. Her voice on voicemail was the same as her voice in person. Direct. No softening at the edges, but not cold. It was a voice that had learned to say what it meant. She said, "I heard from Catherine's office that Lily came in. I hope it was useful. You don't need to respond to this. I just wanted to. I don't know why I called. I don't usually do things I don't know the reason for. That's something. A pause. Anyway, the message ended. He listened to it twice. Then he put his phone down and looked at the ceiling for a moment. He was not, by nature, a man who moved quickly toward things. He had learned the value of stillness, not as avoidance, but as assessment, the way you hold a position in uncertain terrain until the terrain clarifies. But he had also learned in the hard, specific way that you learn things that cost you everything, that some positions you can hold too long, that some clearings you wait for until the light has already shifted and you've been standing still for longer than you knew. He picked up the phone. He didn't call. He sent a text. Short. The way he sent most things. Useful. She's better. Thank you. A pause. Then, because it was true, and because it seemed like a waste not to say it, the voicemail was something too. 3 weeks later, on a Thursday evening that had turned cold early, Daniel finished his shift at 11:30 and came out of the service elevator to find Lily asleep. This was not unusual. She was asleep in the chair at the end of the hallway, the chair she'd taken as hers, pulled slightly out of alignment because she always sat on the edge first before committing her full weight to it and shifting the frame. Her coat was around her. Her shoes were on the correct feet tonight. What was unusual was the person sitting in the chair beside her. Victoria Hale sat with her back straight and her phone face down in her lap. She wasn't looking at Lily. She wasn't looking at anything specific. She was doing what people do when they've been sitting quietly in a space for a while, and their attention has dispersed into the room. The monitor lights from the nurse's station made geometric shapes on the floor. The corridor was very quiet. She looked up when she heard the squeak of the second wheel. He stopped the cart. He looked at her. He looked at Lily, to check. Still asleep. Still breathing. Cough silent tonight. He looked back at Victoria. She found me, Victoria said. Not apologetically, just as information. Found you, he repeated. I came in for a follow-up. I was coming out of the elevator, and she was just... She gestured. There. She said, hello. She told me about the birds at the pulmonologist's office. A pause. She talked about the birds for approximately 10 minutes. He felt something in his chest that wasn't quite an emotion yet, more like the precursor to one. Then she fell asleep, Victoria said. I waited to make sure she was. I was going to leave. She paused. I didn't leave. No, he said. I don't always know why I do things, she said. I told you that. You did, he said. He moved the cart to the side, out of the corridor's center. He came and sat in the chair on Lily's other side. The chair he always sat in when he found her here. The three of them in the dim corridor. The monitor at the nurse's station a distant beep. The city 40 stories below doing its continuous, indifferent thing. Lily shifted slightly in sleep. One hand reached, found Daniel's arm, gripped it with the reflex of someone who had learned, in a very specific and wordless way, where safety was. He let her hold on. Victoria, watch this. Your record says performed under extreme conditions with extraordinary outcomes, she said quietly. I read that part of your file. The parts that weren't classified, he said. Yes. She looked at her hands. I run a company. I make decisions about large things. I don't usually feel... She stopped, reconsidered. I don't usually not know what to say. You don't have to say anything, he said. I know, she said. That's not why I'm talking. The building hummed. Someone on a floor below was starting their night, or ending it. The sounds of the building at night were a specific kind of music. Low, constant. The sound of a place that never completely stopped. There's a position, she said. One of the trauma centers I fund. They've been looking for someone to consult on protocol development. No operating. No patient load if you don't want it. Just using what you know. She said it looking at the wall across from them, not at him. I didn't engineer this. I'm not. I want you to know I'm not engineering this. He was quiet. I know, he said, but it's there. If. I know, he said again. Lily made a small sound. Not distress, the sound of someone settling deeper into sleep, adjusting their body's position in the unconscious arithmetic of comfort. Her grip on his arm loosened slightly, and then tightened again. Victoria looked at her. Really looked the way she'd been looking at things more carefully lately, she'd noticed. The way you start looking at things more carefully after something has stopped and started again. The monitors down the hall beeped their steady count. The elevator cable moved in its shaft. Somewhere in the building, a door opened and closed. Daniel looked at his daughter's sleeping face. He thought about 51 seconds. He thought about the way the monitor had sounded when the rhythm came back. He thought about what Lily had said on the back stairs. Do you miss it? He thought about the word miss and what it actually meant, not the ache of absence, but the recognition that something had been yours and still was, that you'd only been standing still long enough to forget to claim it. He thought about what it meant to be somewhere your daughter could find you, and whether the definition of somewhere had room to grow. He didn't answer Victoria right away. That was all right. The hallway had space for silence. They had both learned in different ways, in different rooms, through different losses, that silence wasn't the absence of something. It was often just what came before. The second wheel of his cart had gone quiet for once. The building breathed around them. Lily slept,